Hello again and welcome to Gabbett Media. I'm Grant Abbott and today we're continuing the animation on our sea shack scene. Today we're animating the boat and I'm going to talk through other animations that I've done which you can see on the screen at the moment. So I've also animated things like the tree leaves, the lamp and the awning, and I'll quickly talk through how I did that. So here we are in the sea shack scene and we're going to animate the boat. Let's zoom into that. Now my boat is lots of separate parts, as you can see here as I'm selecting them all separately. So I could join them all together and animate them as one, or if I want more control I can parent them to an empty, move the empty around, but I could still move these as they're children of the empty, in the same way as a baby inside its mum's tummy. And of course that baby can still move independently. So let's set my cursor to around here with shift right click. Oh, and just a quick thank you to J&M for his shortcut keys here. He's updated it. They're now in the middle here so they don't get in the way of the menu. And thank you to the YouTuber that pointed out that he'd done an update. J&M's channel is absolutely fantastic. I'll try and remember to put a link in the description. Well worth a look at for high quality tutorials. So let's add our empty here, shift A to add, and then empty, plain axis. I think it's a good idea to label this one this time. So it's actually ended up in my animated fish, but I'll double click on that to name it boat control. And let's actually put that in the boat collection. If you haven't already, I would suggest you create a boat collection. And remember, you can move objects to a collection by pressing M and move them into a collection. So we want to parent all these to our empty, so we'll select them all. And there's an easy way. I can actually go to the boat, right click on it and select objects, and it selects them all. I need to make sure my empty is the active object, so let's select that last with shift. And I can see it's the active object because it's yellow. Control P to parent and then object. Now, when I select my empty, it moves everything, but I can still move these individually if I wanted to. So we need to animate our boat bobbing up and down. Let's set our keyframe to frame 0 and just look at it from the side here. I want a very gradual up and down motion, so quite slow, so it doesn't seem like a rough sea. So I'll press I to set a keyframe for the location. In fact, I'm going to use location and rotation, because I'm going to rotate this slightly as well. Now I'm going to set this to be 100 frames, so let's duplicate that, Control C to 100 and Control V. So it's going to be quite a long animation of 4 frames, and then I'll loop it for the rest of my animation, which is actually 500 now. And you can see the end just here. I felt 500 was better. It gives you a really good, nice view of the scene without going too quickly. So I'm going to set a couple of keyframes in here, just looking at how the water's moving. I'm not really following the water much. I'm just going to move it up and down as I see fit. Just gently grabbing the Z-axis and move it up very slightly to around there, and maybe a bit of rotation to around there. Oh, and I forgot to press record, so I'm going to have to press I, lock rot to keyframe that, and this time I'll put the record button on. Do remember you've got that pressed in case you start moving objects around and then adding keyframes to them. Up to frame 50. Slight rotation there, and maybe I'll rotate it in the Z slightly as well. 75, tiny rotation, and tiny bit of movement. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to set my end frame to 100 so it loops, and press play. And that looks fine to me. Just look at it from different angles. That's great. So we can then go to the graph editor, select all, with A, Shift E to make cyclic, and now it will loop. So back to the timeline, change my end frame to 500 and it should animate nicely. So that's great, but how do we animate the rope to go with it? Well, this is slightly more complicated, but not too difficult. So let's select on the rope and zoom into that with full stop or period key on the numpad. Now I only want to animate this bit here and maybe this bit here. Let's go into edit mode and tidy that up a little bit. Just pull that in and grab that and pull it in. Just check from this angle as well, and that's fine. Back into object mode. Now animating curves, there's several ways of doing it. I'm going to use bones, and the reason is I don't want to introduce too much new stuff. And also, if you're trying to export this to another program, I know that bone animations work, but I'm not so sure about all the other types of animations. So if you want to export to Unity or Sketchfab, you may have difficulties with some of the animation. But I do know that bones work, so we'll stick with that. We want to be able to animate this bit here and maybe have this bit swinging in the wind, but we don't need this bit to move. The problem is you can't attach curves to a bone, and this is still a curve. If I go into edit mode, you can still edit the Bezier points. So I need to convert this. The way we do that is go to Object, Convert to Mesh from Curve. But before we do that, let's check our settings of the curve. In the Geometry section down here, I've got my resolution set to 4. And just have a look at what happens to my curve when I bring it down to 0, and it's kind of a square. But that's actually okay because we're viewing it from about a distance from here, or further even, so we can have it a nice low resolution. Also, at the top of our curve menu, we've got resolution preview here, and you can see the difference that makes when I bring it down and up. We can put a few more in here, like 7, and then we still keep the nice curve, and we've got points to play with. So you can actually see the breaks here, and that's what it's going to convert to polygons when it converts it. So now if I go up to Object, Convert to Mesh from Curve, into Edit mode, you can see it's made those polygons as expected. So your curve settings do make a big difference when converting. We don't really want this to be too high poly, there's no need for it, because we're not viewing it from close in. So now we're ready to add some bones to this. So I'm going to have a root bone here, and then a couple of sets of bones going off the root bone. That will all make sense in a second. I'll shift right click to put my cursor there, shift A to add, and then armature. So there's just a single bone there. And let's go into edit mode, and I'm going to scale this down and just place it right in the middle, just there. Now what's really handy is I can turn snapping on and change it to volume. That way, when I move my object, G to grab, it moves it right in the center of any volume that you snap to. So right in the center of all these objects. And that's really handy. So I'll put it in the middle there, and I need to change the viewport display to in front so I can see my bone. Now I'm still in edit mode. Rather than extruding from either end, I'm just going to Shift D to duplicate it. And now that bone is disconnected from this one. That way I can make sure this section of the rope is joined to this bone, and this section of the rope will be joined to the bones that I create along here. If I go to pose mode quickly, you can see that I can move this bone independently of the other one, and they're not affecting each other. So there's no parenting going on here. So back to edit mode, and let's move this one around. G to grab, and E to extrude along our path. And because I had snap to volume on, it's all in place, which is really nice. Let's get this one as well, Shift D, and move this one into place for our swinging rope here. Don't put too many bones in. It won't affect it unless you've got enough cut for one. And also, it just gives you more to animate. There's no point in having loads of detail in your animation because you're viewing this from quite a distance. In fact, 3 would have probably been enough down here. Anyway, back into object mode, select our rope, select our armature, and Control P to parent with automatic weights. Select our bones and into pose mode. Let's go to the beginning here. I'm just going to make sure that I didn't set any keyframes because I had record on all the time. Nope, I'm fine. Ah, no, I'm not. If I select all, there's a few keyframes. I'll just delete those. And that's something that I always forget, is to turn record off again. And I think when I moved this bone in pose mode, it set a keyframe for it. So we want to select all, and I will set a keyframe here. So I lock rot, and we've got a set of keyframes. And our boat animation was 100 frames, so I'm going to do the same here. So it should be a case of selecting this and duplicating it, Shift D to duplicate, and we've got a start and end frame, but we need to move it up and across and follow the boat for these different frames. So let's zoom into this, frame 25, and move them into position. So I'm just going to rotate, and you can see that there's a weight issue there, and the top's being affected by this slightly, but I don't think it's going to have much effect, so I'm not going to bother going into weight painting for this tutorial. Move this up, and move this up, and my bone isn't connecting. So what can I do about this? Well, there's a nice simple way in this case. What I need to do is go to edit mode, which resets their position, but it doesn't remove the keyframes. Click on a bone, and Alt P to remove its parent. Now I'm not clearing the parent, I'm just disconnecting the bone. I'm going to do the same with this one. Alt P, disconnect bone, and this one, Alt P, disconnect bone. Now they're still parented, so I'll go to pose mode again. They're still parented, as you can see. If I move this one, it still moves its children. But what I can do is press G to grab and disconnect it from the other one. So I'm kind of stretching my rope, which obviously doesn't conform to physics, but in this case it follows the boat and it's all working nicely. So to frame 50, and we can kind of stretch them back. Oh, I've still got snapping turned on, that's not helping. So turn snapping off. and I can just move these into position nice and simply, making sure they're correct from each angle. Let's just have a look where they should be connected, right at the end there. So I'll move these accordingly. And I've made a mistake there, I went to frame 51 by accident. That's easy enough to fix. Just select all your bones, select that top summary bone and grab it across. And now it's overlapped the other one and written over the old one. So it's following it fairly nicely, that's not too bad, especially when you see it from a distance like this. That's great. Just a few bones here to edit as well. I'm going to select these three. I'm going to have a really simple animation with these. So let's move them across to one side, across to the other side, and then select them all, copy and paste that beginning keyframe. So they're now looping. So that was Control C with this one selected, Control V to paste it onto where your playhead is. So let's change our end frame to 100 and see what this animation looks like. A tiny bit rough in places, but I think that's fine. So that's the rope and the boat. And the last thing for you to do is just to make that cyclic. So into the graph editor, select all, Shift E, make cyclic. So let's just quickly explain how I animated all these other bits. So you can see my boat moving here on top of the waves. I've also got the leaves moving really slightly, just gently in the breeze. The lamp is probably swinging a bit too fast, considering the leaves are only moving that fast. And the awning is just wafting in the wind as well. And it just adds a nice bit of life. So I'll very briefly go through those. I'll bring up my overlays so you can see what's happening. So I set up a group of bones and just moved them in and out and selected all my leaves and parented them to that set of bones. And I think that worked quite nicely. This one was slightly more complicated. The bones are going inwards. That's because I needed the corners to stay still. So these inner bones are parented to these outer bones. So you create them inwards, then when I rotate the outer bones, the inner bones rotate as well, and it just wafts in the wind like that, although there does seem to be a bit of a jump there. So there's a bit of a glitch there, I must have keyframed something slightly wrong. But it just goes to show you don't really notice it from about this distance. The lamp just has a set of bones, moving a bit too quickly, but that's easy enough to tidy up. So you should be able to do the same for the seaweed as well. And by the end of it, have a lovely animation of everything. In the next episode, I will try and talk about how to export this to other programs. And I'll talk briefly about doing a night scene as well. Thanks for watching, and I hope this helps.